Hello everyone and welcome to this latest edition of Ascertia On, Ascertia's informative online series looking into hot topics in the world of digital trust. My name is John Jolliffe, Product Manager for Ascertia Signing Hub, and today I'm joined by Mike Hathaway, Ascertia's Chief Product Officer.
Hi John, hello everyone.
In today's edition, we wanted to look into a topic that's heavily debated by organizations and enterprises that are considering trust services such as eSignature, whether to go for an on-premise or a public cloud deployment model or some other variant. But before we get into the details, Mike, I think it would be helpful if we start with some definitions and explain what do we mean when we talk about the deployment model of an eSignature application. I'll just start by outlining the deployment model refers to the location of the different components that make up an eSignature service. Any eSignature application has a front end and a back end. The front end of the application is the bit that the everyday user sees. It's the place where you prepare your documents, select your recipients, send those documents out for signature and gather the evidence once they're all signed. But whenever high trust digital signatures are required, you need another component that can handle all the secure cryptographic processes associated with digital signatures. Digital signatures, as we know, they benefit from additional legal weight because the identity of the signer is verified and cryptographically bound to the document in a way that proves the intent to sign. And it's that cryptographic engine that's the back end of an e-signature platform.
Yes, that's right. But it's also important to remember that these back-end trust services that are used in all these varying deployment scenarios can also change. But it boils down to two distinct models that are often referred to as public and private trust. Private trust is where an enterprise has built their own PKI, their own trust infrastructure, and their only requirement is to trust digital certificates and signatures internally within the enterprise. Public trust, conversely, is where an enterprise, or more often than not a subset of users, a department of the enterprise, needs to digitally sign documents and have their signatures recognized by users outside of the enterprise by any user. Public trust and trust service providers is a big topic that we can cover in another Ascertia On episode, so I'll leave it there for the moment.
Right, so in this discussion, when we refer to the deployment model, we're describing where you choose to place the physical servers that these different systems run on and where you store the related data and who owns the infrastructure. And as we'll see, those different options can impact questions of security, legal compliance, and performance. Okay, Mike, so now we've got the notion of the deployment model straight. Let's go a little deeper. Describe for our listeners, if you will, what are the different options available?
Sure. So there's four main categories that we see. So you have start out with on-premise. This is where both the front-end business application or front-end signing application and the back-end trust services are owned and hosted by an enterprise within their data centers, managed by corporate IT behind the corporate firewall. This option provides full data sovereignty, so the enterprise decides the security controls over who can access the system, where the data is stored, and importantly, because the organization is operating their own trust service, they get to decide the ultimate trust level on their certificates and signatures. Public cloud is on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's the complete opposite of on-premise. All the server infrastructure and data is stored securely in a multi-tenanted cloud service together with the front-end application. And then if you're using a trust service provider, the trust services are also hosted within a cloud service. There's encryption of the data both in transit and at rest, but all the components of the service are outside of the organization's data center and services, which means you don't have to worry about managing the infrastructure themselves. By using a trust service provider for the trust service, this provides keys and certificates that are trusted by users that are outside of the enterprise. So signatures on documents will verify in desktop readers independently of the enterprise's PKI. Private cloud is similar to public cloud, but the customer might have specific security requirements about the segregation of data from other customers. So you'll expect to pay a little extra to ensure that that's provided. But private cloud would not include public trust services and therefore would be procured from public sector and connected to private cloud instances. And then hybrid, as the name suggests, is a combination of these, and we'll come on to more of that later.
That's some good detail there. Already in those explanations, you were hinting at why these options exist and how they support different security and compliance requirements. But perhaps we should give our listeners a sense of when these solutions are appropriate and for what different kinds of organization. Do you want to take the first option, the on-premise one?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, the way you deploy different components of an eSignature service doesn't just impact your security and compliance stance. It can also have an impact on performance implications as data is pushed between several components of the service. The on-premise model is typically used by organizations that are subject to the strictest of security considerations or have a particular performance metric. And they have the staff and expertise to build and maintain both the signature application and all of the other relevant trust services. Their security policy may determine that they cannot let data leave their network. So perhaps they're a government department handling highly sensitive data, or perhaps they're a company in a sector like aerospace and defense, manufacturing, automotive or pharmaceutical that requires total control over its corporate data and its intellectual property. Or perhaps they're a bank that's subject to very restrictive regulatory requirements in a way that they process user data, and they have a corporate mandate to avoid using cloud services. All of these organizations could easily have performance considerations. So, for example, if they're handling extremely large documents, and the round trip of sending over the public cloud for signature and back adds significant delay, it warrants using on-premise processing. Also, on-premise is very important when the organization acts as its own source of trust. So the private trust model I mentioned earlier. But public cloud is completely different though, right?
Yeah, and as we said before, public cloud is more or less the direct opposite of the on-premise option. And I think it's the easiest for people to understand, and it is the one that most people think of when they think of an e-signature service. I'd also say it's by far the most common model. It's designed for mass adoption because the startup cost is minimal for any new organization. You don't need to purchase and own significant infrastructure. You just need a subscription to a service. So public cloud is relevant if you're not the kind of organization that needs to own and manage their own trust infrastructure for the reasons Mike said. Example, you're not necessarily issuing your employees or members with their own smart cards. Importantly, with public cloud, you can rely on third-party trust providers to perform the ID verification and also to issue the digital signing credentials and to store them in their cloud for the user to access. So, Mike, that just leaves private cloud.
Yep, which is like public cloud, but the front-end signature application is hosted on a dedicated cloud server and will be connected to either trust services that are private and operated within the same private cloud, or optionally, where public trust is required, connected to a publicly trusted service provider. So both options provide back-end cryptographic services to store user digital signature keys and perform cryptographic signing for the different trust models. Private cloud ensures better logical segregation of customer data compared to public cloud. But it's useful for organizations that don't have in-house PKI expertise but require higher degrees of data sovereignty than public cloud.
Okay, so it's coming together now. We've discussed the different trust models, public and private, and we've looked at the different deployment models, on-premise, public cloud, private cloud, hybrid. At a high level, you could say all of this is really describing who's responsible for performing the tasks that enable us to rely on a signed document, who performs the identity verification of users, who issues the cryptographic credentials, where those credentials are securely stored for use when signing, and how you can verify the signature in a document. Perhaps it would help if you could just underline how the trust model is linked to the deployment model and why that's important for organizations.
Sure. Okay. For some companies where security is key, where they've got the skills and the finances, they tend to host these services in-house. They'll identify users in line with their own requirements, control the way digital certificates are issued, and manage all of the highly secure infrastructure and specialist hardware that allows their users to generate key certificates and sign documents. That's what we mean by an in-house or privately trusted PKI. Some companies will take on a portion of that process themselves. They'll control the way the signers are identified and the conditions under which signature certificates are issued, but they'll contract with a trusted third party to actually issue, manage, and store the user signing keys in their secure infrastructure. And other companies rely on fully trusted third parties for all of these trust services. So it's important to note that the first category, the source of trust that vouches for the signer's identity, is the organization that builds, operates, and runs the PKI. And that's fine when only users of the same system need to be able to rely on the signed document. Those are all internal users. But this changes when you switch to using a publicly trusted service. There are certainly obligations that you and your users must fulfill in order to use a publicly trusted certificate and to be able to issue by keys and certificates for your enterprise users.
Right, and that's because in the private cloud and public cloud models, the trust can go back to a publicly trusted third-party provider, a certificate authority, which has to perform those tasks in line with local applicable law. Here in the EU, that means eIDAS. We say that these third parties act as a public source of trust because, as I think we've made clear, their participation ensures that anyone receiving a signed document has a way to validate the underlying signatures and confirm that the document is valid. In the EU, again, that means confirming whether the signature can be considered a qualified electronic signature or an advanced electronic signature. And other regions use different terminology, but the legal value to the relying party is essentially the same and the principles are the same. Think when you open a PDF in Adobe Acrobat and you see the blue bar at the top with a message about whether the signatures are valid, that's one form of public trust at work.
Yeah. And so just to pull all this back together in the context of Signing Hub, our flexible deployment models on-premise, private cloud, public cloud, or hybrid allow the signature application to call on all of these services of trust. You're not locked into or limited to just one, right? So you can mix and match public and private trust from right within the product. Some deployments are only ever going to require public trust for a subset of users, where signatures need to be trusted outside of the organization. But for the rest, you don't. And it's a significant feature of Signing Hub. It's a key way in which we enable different deployment models we've been talking about.
Okay, so Signing Hub clearly offers organizations unique flexibility, different trust sources, different deployment models. But I think we need to look a little more closely at why all this flexibility is actually a good thing.
Yep, it's a good point, and I agree. Here's a few good reasons why having all of these deployment models available in a single e-signature application is a good thing. So first, we'll call these coverage. But quite simply, if you have all these options available in one platform, then you have an application that can accommodate multiple different use cases from multiple different user groups in one go, without having to procure multiple solutions from a different selection of vendors, right? We have many customers who want to adopt a hybrid deployment model that combines different options. They might have a ultra secure group of users where corporate or government data cannot exit their own estate or reach the internet in any way. And then they may have another group of users with much less strict requirements that can benefit from the flexibility and cost savings of other cloud-based solutions.
Right, and I think another related big benefit could be called something like investment protection or future-proofing. Because if you have this very flexible platform, you know that however your security or user requirements evolve, you're covered. You won't have to migrate to a different solution or manage multiple solutions in parallel for different users. And the fact is, requirements do change all the time. Could be changes in national law, could be changes in sectoral regulations, could be your own internal corporate risk assessment. And also one that's often overlooked, just shifts in end customer expectations of trust and the way you protect their data. All of these, they can really change how an organization will need to deploy e-signature options over time. And I think related to that, because Signing Hub covers so many use cases and different user types across the different deployment models, it means that the product comes really with an outstandingly broad feature set. It's built to cover so much. And that means it's actually likely to cover needs that organizations don't even know they have when they first start with us.
Absolutely. And I think we should add that there's additional benefits to that are particularly relevant if you are operating as a trust service provider. You know, you've got your own instance of Signing Hub. Perhaps you white label it or operate it under your own brand name. That means that you can offer all of this flexibility to your own customers. You get to choose exactly what go-to-market strategy you want to pursue, which type of customers you want to target and serve, because only Signing Hub from Ascertia can support all of these options.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Mike. I think we've covered a lot of ground in a short time, and I'm sure that's going to be very helpful for any organizations that are thinking about deploying e-signatures and thinking through how they can practically go about it. That's it for this edition. Thanks to everyone for listening in. We hope you found that discussion informative. Please share any comments or get in touch if you have further questions. And we hope you will tune in again for a near edition of Ascertia On in the near future.